And if you click the online this link, then you will see this, right? And then so let's just start with the chapter 1. Okay, getting started. Okay, and so it shows that once you install the R, right? So let me just open the R. There is R 6x64. Since my computer is a 64-bit, so my operating system is, and then my CPU is a 64-bit, right? It's based on this. It's a really 60-bit OS and the CPU. So I'm gonna click the RX64, right? And then you will see this, right? So this is like the very basic the GUI, right? GUI for the R, right? So in this console, okay, this is called console, right? In this console, you can do a very simple thing, like 1 plus 1. By the way, you can follow while watching my video tutorial, but since I'm recording this video lecture, if you miss something and I'm too fast, you can always watch this video tutorial. And I highly recommend that you watch my video tutorial like a few times, right? Okay. So when you open this R console, so like things like 1 plus 1, right? So it's a 2. And then like a 2, 2, let's say 2 multiplied by 2 is 4, right? So you can do a simple thing using R console, right? But when you make a real program, right? You need to write many lines of code and execute them. So this console is, you may use this console for very simple thing, right? However, when you write a couple of lines of code, then this console is not really useful, right? So in that case, there's a couple of ways, right? You can say, you can just click new script, right? And then you can say, for example, 1 plus 1, right? And then 2 plus 2, right? And etc. You can just keep going on, right? And what you can do is, okay, so you can, if you just want to execute these 2 lines at the same time, you can just select, right? And then just click this icon, run line or selection, right? So you can see that it's 2 and 4, right? Okay, so yes, I mean, in worst case, you can use this default editor, provided by this regular R, right? You can use a default editor. However, it's basically many people use RStudio, which is basically it's the IDE, right? It's a development environment. Basically, it's an editor, just editor for the R. You can think that way. Okay, so I assume that you already installed the RStudio, right? So when you open your RStudio, right, you will see this. Okay, so this is RStudio. This is like it has much nicer user interface, as you can see. Okay, and you know that you have to install RStudio after you install R, because RStudio is just nothing. It's just an interface. Okay, so just an editor. And the real engine, right? The real engine is R. So you first need to install R, then install RStudio, this interface. Okay. Having said that, oops. Okay. So that's the R package. This R, right? Okay. So now, and all the examples, right? All the example, yes, you can use this R, right? All the example, all the, I mean, I think at least first couple of chapters, yes, you can just simply use R, but I'm going to use the RStudio instead. Okay. Okay. So okay, so now at the very beginning, right? Basically, you have this is like a console, and this is environment, and this is like a directory, right? And to see, I mean, first the comments they're using this shop, right? This is the comments, and then the working directory is the command for the working directory is get wd. Then it shows your current working directory. Okay, and then if you want to change your current working directory, right, then you can use set wd, right? That's how you can change your working directory. And then for the so let's just first talk about this working directory, okay? So let me show you. So to find out my current working directory, right? You have to use what? You have to use a get wd, right? Get wd is the find the current working directory. Okay, my current working directory at this point is C user owner document, right? But I don't really like it because I just want to create my own directory, right? So in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my window. Like window, right? In under the document, right? You know what? What I'm going to do is I'm going to delete. Oops, sorry. I'm going to delete this. Okay, so under the document, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my new own directory, just dedicate just to R, right? So I'm going to make the folder. And then I'm going to say ABCR. Oh, I mean, it's up to you. Just directory name. And I just want to call this directory as R, ABCR. Because it's starting from the A. So I can always see this directory on the top of the list. But it's up to you. You can, but shorter the better, right? So I just ABC-R. But you can use your own directory name.
Professor, I have a question.
Yes.
Are you memorizing these commands or are you copying them? Does the does R knows these commands? And
yes. Yes. Right. R already knows this command, and so this is like a key command, like a keywords, like is a command that R knows, and a couple of commands. I think as the first, I know that it's how to memorize, and in addition, you don't have to really memorize them. This is because I mean this is online course, right? And when I give you some assignment, right? You can always search the Google. But knowing the commands, right? At least, I don't really precisely remember all the commands, but I know at least that these commands are available, and at that case you can always search, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So and then actually after a couple of weeks, I think basic commands, right? You will automatically. I mean, you will I think you will know them by heart. So
okay.
Yes, I know. I mean, even for me, I don't really memorize all the commands. No, but I can always search Google, right? So, but the important thing is at least I know that I remember that those commands are available. But I really don't know the name. In that case, you can always search, right? Okay. Good. So this is get. Okay. Now I have a directory called ABCR, right? That I just created on the document. Okay, now I know that, so I want to make this ABCR as my current working directory. Okay, and what the command for that is set WD. Okay, by the way, this WD means working directory, right? WD. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my working directory to this one, ABCDR, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set WD and open parenthesis, right? And then you have to use this quote, right? And then I can type this, right? But I always make a mistake. So by the way, this is is it called backward or forward slash? But anyway, this is the this slash, right? Is the one that is used in R, right? Okay. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it because I don't want to make any mistake, a typo. So I'm going to copy this and then I'm going to paste.
No, I'm about to stop.
Okay, by the way, could you please mute your microphone?
I don't.
Okay, please mute your microphone, please, unless you need to speak up.
I was doing my.
Okay, so now, and then since the one that I have just created is ABCR, right? So what I'm going to do is this slash, right? And then A, B, C, and R, right? And since this is a directory, so I'm going to add one more, right? So now this is going to be my working directory from now on, right? So, and then I'm going to enter. Okay, by the way, yes, okay. So now it's to check my working directory, right? Get WD, right? This is my working directory. My working directory has been changed. Okay. So any question? Okay, so basically, and the next part is the installing and loading R packages. There are two commands that you should know. The first one is install the package and then package name. And then if you want to use this package, there is another command called library, right? But I'll talk more about this later when we need to install our packages, okay? But at this point, what you need to know is, hey, there is a command, right, for installing, right, and loading the package. For installing the packages, you use this command, install packages, and then package name. And for the loading, once you install the package, you have to use it, right? But before you use that package, there's many different packages, like math packages, and the packages for the plotting, right, diagram, right? And the packages for the statistics. There are many different packages, right? We'll talk more about those packages, but at this point, I want you to know that there is a install packages, right? These are the command. And then for the loading, once you install it, right, you have to load it. And that's the command, okay? For now. Okay, so now I'm going to move to chapter 2. I'm done with the chapter 1. Okay, chapter 2 is basically it's arithmetic and all those things, okay? And then log and exponential, right? And then E notation, because the R used this E notation, right? As you can see. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the object and vectors. I think I can talk up to, I don't know, we'll see. I hope I can finish up to here, but we'll see. Okay, and first I'm going to start with this arithmetic, the very basic, the concept arithmetic, right? And okay, So for that, I'm going to use a script, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, right? And then New File, and then you can click R script. Okay, now you have a full panes, right? Though this one is for the R script, and this one is the console. And then I have on the right side I have a global environment, and then the fourth one is the files. As you can see, the ABC Python is what? The ABC Python is my working directory, right? Okay. So now the first thing is basically I'm just following the book. Okay. The first one is arithmetic. And I'll just do the simple thing, 2 plus 3. Okay? And if you want to execute this, there are a couple of ways. Okay, by the way, first it's the comment, right? We learned the comment start with this sharp. So when the R execute your script, it's going to skip the comment. Right? Because comment basically has no effect. So what I'm going to say is chapter 2. So chapter this is 2.1.1. Okay? And of the R book. Okay? Okay, so now since this is a comment, and now I want to execute 2 plus 1, 2 plus 3. Right? There's a couple of ways. You put your cursor on this line, right? And then here there is a icon called run, right? So it said run the current line or selection. So I can click this run. So I'm going to click run right now. So when I click run, you see that 5, right? The 2 plus 3 is a 5. Okay, so that's like one way. And another way is, let's say for I think next example is 14 divided. By the way, this is a division. 14 divided by 6, right? And Professor, I really hate using this the mouse. You know, I'm kind of a keyboard guy. Okay, I want to use the keyboard only. Yes, there's a way. Another way to execute this is use control, right? Control return. If you just want to use the keyboard, so put your, you know what? Maybe this is okay. So put your cursor on that line, right? Because this is the line that you want to run, and control, right? Control enter. Control at the same time, not the return or enter, right?
Do you have to write all of that?
No, this one is just comment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is comment. So this is just comment to explain, right? And just like this is a comment, right? So comment is really meaningless. I mean, there's no effect. So that's why it only executes this. And then your R basically ignore the comments. Okay, so this is two ways to execute your command, right? But another thing is, let's say if you want to run, right, these two lines at the same time, then you select these two lines, right? And then just run or control return at the same time. So let's just execute these two lines at the same time, right? And then click run, right? I have the same result, 5 and 2.33. Okay, so that's how you can execute these lines of your script. The Python, not the Python, sorry. I'm so used to word Python. I'm teaching Python for many, many years now. But anyway, okay. And now this is like 14 divided by, I'm just using the follow along the book's example. The 6 plus 5, right? You know that there's a difference, right? Difference between this, oops. Okay, let's first run this. And then I got 1.27, right? But you know that there's a difference between 14 divided by 6 plus 5, right? I'll have a totally different result. Why? Anyone? You can, yes.
It's MDOS
Go ahead.
order of operations.
Pardon?
He said order of operations.
Yes, order of the operation, yes. Because this division, right? Because division has a higher precedence than this add sign, right? So what will happen is this will be computed first, then the 5 will be added. However, in this case, 14 divided by, right? Because of this parenthesis, 6 plus 5 is computed, right? Which is 11. So this, in this case, is basically 14 divided by 11. But this one is basically what? 14 divided by 6. Then the result, then the 5 will be added to the result. I mean the 14 divided by 6. So there is a difference. Let's just run and you see that there's a different result, right? Okay. Now exponential. 3 to the 2, right? So 3 times 3. Basically this is what? Exponential, right? The exponential. So basically what? 3 power to the 2, right? 3. So that is what? So the control return. So it's 9, right? Because 3 times 3. Okay, let's say the finally 2 to the 3, right? How about the 2 to the 3? So it means that 2 times, okay, so this means what? 2 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 2, right? The power of 3. So let's just run this. Control return. Yes. 8, right? So this is, I'm done with section 2.11. Okay. So now let's talk about section 2.22. Okay. Okay. Now, then section 2.12, sorry, not the 2.2 to 12. So 2.12 is they're talking about the log and exponential, but I kind of already explained. Okay, so now, so let's say log function, right? So log function is if log function. Okay, I need. Okay, so the example of the log function is this: log. If the x is equal to 243, and then base is equal to 3, right? And if this is something that you want to calculate, then you can have what? So run this, right? And then what? The answer is what? Answer is a 5, right? So log function. Hold on, I need this. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so the log function. Okay, so basically, so log, right? X is equal to what? 243. And then y, base, not the y, sorry. Base is a 3, right? Okay, so you know that you guys know the log function, right? The log, so this means log, the base is a 3. and then the exponential part is 243. Okay, so that's what this means in R. And another thing, let's just a little bit talk about the function, because basically the function is very useful concept and used in pretty much any programming language. Okay, so by the way, what is a function? Anyone? So what is a function? Okay, so what is a function? Okay, the function is basically, you can think as a, I mean, we learned the function, right? When you guys in the middle school or high school, right? The function is you can think as this is black box, okay? And then functions, you have what? You have input, right? It could be multiple inputs. It could be like inputs, right? It could be multiple inputs, right? And then this function f, we typically use the f, right, for the notation f for the functions. And then for the inputs, we typically use x1, x2, and x3, and etc., right? And this function processes these inputs, right, and then generates the outputs. Usually, there's one output, but it could this function can generate actually more than one outputs. So y2 and y3, but usually there's one, just only one output. But yes, there could be multiple outputs. So basically, the concept of function is what? If there's an input, and this function processes inputs, right? And then it generates outputs. Okay, some function. Okay, so that's the function typically. You know what? Some functions, I know that it's rare, but some functions, they don't really generate any outputs. Okay, just take the inputs and then it's rare, but there is a function that it does not really generate any output. But anyway, but this is a typical concept of functions, right? And you can think, if you look at this, you can think this as a functions. Okay, so if I just draw this picture, this log function, right? And what is the name of this function? Log, right? So that's the name of the function log, right? And then what is the input? Usually the input is specified within this parenthesis. So we have how many inputs? We have two inputs. This is first input, and this is the second input, right? So the log will take the first argument. Okay, this is called the argument. Okay, so argument or the input. Okay, so we have two arguments, or we have two inputs, right? The first argument for this function is what? 243. And then the base is a 3, right? So what the function does is it's going to compute log 3 to 243, right? And then it will generate, what is the output? Output is what? 5, right? Okay, now, in R, you can just simply will say, I think you're going to have a same result. You can say log 243 and comma 3. Okay, it's no problem. However, this author, right, and this is like common in R. I mean, this is, by the way, this is programming style. But in R, they put some variable. Okay, or this is called argument. And for example, you know what? So you can put any name for this. You can say X and you can say Y. But X and Y really doesn't make any, especially if you put Y instead of base, it's kind of meaningless, right? So when you choose a variable name, please choose something meaningful. So instead of put Y here, right? By putting the base, you know that, oh, this is what? This is like base is a 3, right? We know that this is base is a 3, and X is this, because when you typically write the functions, right, the fx is log, 3 to the x, right? So that mean by x. So the author put the x. Okay, so okay, and so by the way, this is just variable name. You don't have to put this x and base. For example, I'll show you the example using RStudio. For example, right, you can say log 243, which is the first argument, right? The next argument is, by the way, when you put your cursor here, the RStudio is smart, right? So it kind of 243, oops, comma, right? I think they, but anyway, okay. And then you can put 3, right? Okay, and then just click run. Fine, same thing.